I think that's it. This is like just for, we talked about connectivity, as we talked about committing things, but also receiving information back, right? Requests and responses, your traditional like, you know, web services, right? But then I think building off of what we were just talking about is, digitally linking data, devices, and people. So it doesn't matter what the application is, what the purpose is, who's doing it, or even the underlying data sources that you're referencing or using. It makes no difference, right? As long as the blockchain or that is committed to accepting, this standard language. Now, this is something that and this is a little bit more as we get into it about like how it works theoretically. I will admit, like, I have not tried to implement the Rosetta API in any kind of work that I've done, although have done almost hundreds of API integrations in my lifetime, which seems kind of crazy. But I think that, and welcome kind of anybody to talk about their implementation or using the Rosetta API. But, so develop, in your kind of application development of your choice, right? So it doesn't matter if, what language that you're trying to use, that you can develop your application. And then there's a containerization aspect to this that kind of works just like a wallet. And then, of course, the Rosetta API is kind of that translator tool or that translator specification that works back and forth between these and then to the actual blockchain. So I'm always trying to simplify things and oversimplify things, especially in tech, but wanted to open it up a little bit so that maybe somebody on the call today can talk about their experience with doing this or things to look out for. So as I start to, utilize the Rosetta API, any kind of lessons learned. So opening it up a little bit.
ETO, you haven't done a test case on this yet, have you? I tried to reach out to Yoshi, but I haven't heard back from him if he had done one or not.
There are test cases in the actual Rosetta server repository. I believe let me see if I've got that open. There are a number of test cases in there actually that you can run. If you go to the Rosetta Node SDK. So I guess, try not to get too in the weeds here, but the Rosetta implementation from DigiByte's point of view is really three different components. I will drop them into the Discord chat here. But the first thing, the base, the foundation of our implementation of the spec is the Rosetta Node SDK, right? So that is the very underbelly of how does DigiByte adopt this specification in such a way that we can transform those requests, those defined requests defined by Coinbase, into RPC calls. Right? So that's the translation layer. That's where the real hard work happens. The next piece is a client. This is all based off of JavaScript, by the way. The next piece is a client. That client is actually what exposes all of those RPC calls, all of those requests as those RESTful endpoints, those routes, if you will, that you see in the Rosetta specification. And then there is a container, so this is where the Docker comes into play, that packages up the SDK and the client into a single deployable, if you will, like one-line command you can run on your terminal that actually fires up this Docker container, exposes it on a local IP address or a remote one if you deploy it remotely. You can deploy this anywhere that Docker is supported. And that's what actually serves up that client as a server. right? And that's found here. So you have kind of a silo there with the server being the very top of the silo. And then you have some middleware, which is that Node SDK. That's what the server is hosting. And then you have the actual client, I mean, the SDK under the hood that's actually doing the talking to, right? It's the thing that's actually talking to the DigiByte blockchain under the hood, making those RPC calls to a node that is being run. And none of which the developer needs to know anything about, right? This is all obfuscated from the developer. All they have to know is how to deploy that Docker container and send it HTTP requests based off of the documentation that Coinbase provides, right? So anyway, if you look at that very first link, you'll see that there is a directory in there called examples. And if you click into there, there's two folders called basic and server skeleton. But anyway, what these are kind of simple use cases that are put together that allow the developers to kind of play around with things. But we also use it for test-driven development. So we run our test suite against those to make sure that things are working as we expect them to. And I believe the client also might have a docs folder that you can click into, and there's a bunch of test cases and stuff in there as well. They're all written in Markdown, so you can just open them up in any web browser. And if you're wanting to know how to get account information, you just click on the account API Markdown document, and it explains how you would go about doing that and what an example request and whatnot would look like. But I don't know that is the kind
there are example requests in there.
Oh yeah.
You were looking for okay.
Yeah,
so I could like use Postman or something like that.
Sure. Yep. Once you've got the Docker image running, as soon as you've got that Docker container up, you can point Postman at it, and you can actually start making requests. So that's exactly right.
Because I think that was kind of a little bit of our. So you're saying you can so when you get the Docker container in there, or you have your Docker container up. Could you talk a little bit about what it takes to stand up a Docker container and a little bit of the configuration that's involved to get started?
So you don't need to really know anything about configuration per se.
Okay.
As long as you have Docker Desktop installed on your machine, or whatever machine you're going to do your development on, you just go point your Docker at the directory and just Docker build and Docker run, and you're off to the races. It's going to do what it needs to do. And once that's up and running on your local machine, you can actually use these examples. I'll paste them in the chat here. You can go to the docs folder on the client, and you can see a whole lot of examples of what you can call. I mean, there's a lot of examples in there, maybe 25 or more. So lots to chew on in there. But then again, you can also go to the Coinbase Rosetta documentation itself, and they should have live Swagger docs that are running. Yeah, here's the API spec. Here we go.
Yeah, they have. I don't know if they're live, but they do have some.
No, they're not. They're not live, but they're. What I mean by that is they're live. They're generated live, right? So I'm really trying to keep this at a super high level. The Rosetta API is really a open API specification, and an open API is really think of it like the HTML spec, right? HTML working group generated a specification that tells everybody how they should write HTML, right? CSS is another example for those that are familiar with web development anyway. OpenAPI is just another one of those things, and it's a specification that defines how you should describe APIs, right? And so Rosetta adopts that protocol, and so when you load this page that I just linked to, it's actually generating the current version of the spec. So if you look, just picking at the very top, the endpoint for accounts. So if you had your Docker container up and running, you could make a request like so, and just plug in accounts balance, and that would do exactly what you expect it to do. It's going to get an accounts balance, but that's not enough, right? You've got to kind of dig more into the API. So if you dig deeper into, well, what does accounts balance do? How do I actually use that? What information do I need to submit in order to get a valid response back? Well, then you just click on that link, and again, it's going to drive down into that open API spec. And this is live generated current version, so it's telling us at the top this is version 1.4.14 of the spec, and the spec says that if you want to use this endpoint, this is what your request needs to look like. You've got to include a network identifier, you got to include an account identifier. This is all the information you would need to include in order to get a valid 200 response.
Even though it doesn't have any authentication, right, as we kind of talked about. But
that's right.
It does need some sort of pieces of data for it to work.
Well, of course.
Yeah. I just want to butt in. You guys are doing a great job. Again, these links that DTR is posting are on the DigiByte Alliance, like this chat channel. Go to the open chat and click right there, and you'll be able to see all the links. I know some people are trying to follow along and messaging. They're having trouble with that. Sorry.
Oh, that's too bad. Hopefully, folks can figure out how to open that up.
These are fascinating links, and awesome. I can share these links maybe across the Discord as well, so everyone can see them while you're still talking.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, it's kind of. I don't want to make sure I get the vernacular right here. It's kind of obvious, right, that if you're going to ask the server, I want to know what an account balance is, that it's pretty intuitive that you're going to need to provide some information to the server for it to even know what account balance to get for you, right? So, a lot of these, I guess the point is that while Rosetta makes it very easy in that everybody's going to speak this common language, and it's a RESTful web service, and so lots of people understand what a RESTful web service is. That's the playing field leveling kind of aspect to this. But you still have to spend some time to kind of go into the spec and really dig down inside of what each of these endpoints do, right? Same thing with a block. Like if I want to use the block endpoint, right, which I'll paste into the chat here, you still have to tell the server, well, which blockchain am I talking to, right? Which network? Maybe there's a test net, maybe there's a main net, right? For those that don't know, that most of these blockchains have different networks that are running. Testnet is usually used for development, and mainnet is the production version of a blockchain, right? So you've got to tell the server a little bit of information about what it is you're requesting. And so that's what these documents that I'm linking to will teach developers is, okay, so you want to get information about a block. Well, this is the information you have to send along with your request. You've got to give it a block index, and you got to give it a hash, right? So it knows exactly which block you're wanting to get. And then if you've given it the right information, you scroll further down in the docs there, you will see what does a block successful 200 response look like, right?
Which we all love.
And that, right? And so, and it just, right? But it even but see, that's cool, because if you scroll down even further, you'll see that the specification even defines what that looks like, right? So if I do it wrong, what does doing it wrong look like? Well, there's what doing it wrong looks like. And what's cool about this is that DigiByte didn't have to write this. This is the specification. So under the hood, random web developer that knows nothing about DigiByte, they don't need to understand what DigiByte error codes are or what DigiByte's RPC errors are, right? They don't need to know anything about that. And so they can just lean on this documentation, which we didn't have to write, to understand exactly what they're going to get back if they do it wrong. And then they can work out how to handle that.
I think you make a good point. You have to drill into the specification a little bit before you
You
just
do.
start calling. As somebody that's gotten trial and error, when I was telling you, I started to learn API integrations on SOAP and like SOAP 1.0 way back when, and I've gotten bills before from like providers or data providers that said, "Oh, I owe them so much money," right? Because I was just playing with them or trying to get it to work without really at that point kind of hacking it. So I think that's one takeaway is like, and it's, well, first of all, it's great that we have these examples for question responses. I think, Laura, that was something that we were looking for, but maybe didn't know that they were in the depths of Discord. So it's great that you have the examples to kind of build off of, but then as you start to like utilize it, is really dig into the specs. And I think that will be a time saver as you start to kind of like before you even start to utilize the API. Lessons learned.
Yeah, and you know, for that matter, Coinbase does list some implementation samples that people can review. Reference implementations based off of Ethereum or Bitcoin. I mean, we used the Bitcoin reference when we built the DigiByte implementation about, oh gosh, it's been 2 years now, it seems, since we started working on this. But so there's examples of where you can go to see what's possible. There's even testing documentation, like how would you go about testing your work using Rosetta, which is important if you're going to build something. They even talk about, you know, how you might extend the spec, which we talked a lot about internally, which nothing to announce right now, but we talk about that a lot inside of how can we add extensions to this specification so that we can support kind of DigiByte specific use cases. And then there's some best practices, like you were asking earlier about how do you, wait a minute, that's not the right link. Yeah, no, that is the right link. So you asked about how should I configure things? What are some of the gotchas you want to know about hosting this Docker container? So they've got documentation that kind of gives a high level overview of the things that you want to keep in mind when you host it. Because one thing to host it, you know, for development on your local machine, but it's an entirely different situation when you talk about exposing your container and whatever application you're gonna build for the public to consume. I think that's one thing to point out to the group here is that DigiByte doesn't host this. We provide the Rosetta implementation for the public to use in the hopes that you all will build great things. But DigiByte does not host a Rosetta server for the community. That would be, depending on how many people would use it, that'd be a considerable operational overhead. It would have a pretty considerable cost associated with it. You know, all the cloud providers provide infrastructure for you to host Docker containers, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Azure, and it's all pretty easy and straightforward to do that, but it comes at great expense to do that. So we don't. You can certainly try to host it from a private machine if you're into that. Nothing's stopping you from doing that. It'd be pretty resource intensive, I'm sure you can imagine. Being the longest blockchain in the world, it takes quite a long time for the mainnet to sync when you get your Docker container up and running, just like the regular wallet does, which hopefully one day we can improve that, but you know, that is what it is at the present time.
And
I'm kind of rambling at this point. I'm sorry, everybody.
No, this is
good.
Awesome. This is perfect. I have a question. Based on the version that we had that you'd worked with First Bridge on getting, you know, how far is that from the latest version? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the specification changes over time, meaning they've got these defined routes, right? So I gave you the links to some of the examples like block and account balance and things like that. So over time, as they extend and evolve the spec, those routes can change, new routes can be added. There could be some minor changes to the request response shape, right? So we talked a little bit about the information you as the developer might have to send in order to get a correct response back. Sometimes that changes. And when those kinds of changes happen, implementers like us kind of have to keep up to date. We have to go in and make those changes. Otherwise, things break. If an integrator, so in this case Coinbase, is currently running their exchange using the Rosetta version 1.4.14, which is the current version right now, if there's a blockchain on there that's running version 1.4.1, which is what we are currently up to, there would be problems, right? You could imagine that there's going to be something in their system that tries to make a call to our container, and because our container is 13 minor versions behind, it could break, or it could result in an unexpected or undefined behavior. And so, we as the DigiByte community need to get that updated. But time and resources on an open source project being what they are, we just haven't been able to do that yet. I don't even really know what the delta is between version 1.4.1 and 1.4.14. I can't imagine, because they're minor version bumps. We're talking about dot version here. I can't imagine that it's anything major. There's likely no significant breaking changes between the two. So I'm not worried in that respect, but nonetheless, we should work to get that brought up to date to the latest version of spec as soon as we can.
And is that a Java programmer? That would be like the skill set for taking it from point 1 to point 14. Is that what?
So we made a very opinionated call when we decided to implement this. Most of the blockchain community is, I'm going to get a little finger waggy here. Most of the community is very enamored with shiny nickels. And so they chase whatever the latest thing is. And so the latest thing in this community being the Rosetta community, seems to be the Go language. And then there are some that are enamored with the Rust language. And I think all that stuff is interesting. But when you take a step back and you're thinking about what language can we use that has the most number of experienced developers, like what is the language that's going to have the broadest, I would say preference, but the most number of people that are going to know that language, right? And so we chose JavaScript. We could have chose C++, we could have chose Java, we could have chose Python. Any language that you can write a RESTful web service is fair game. C#, could have wrote it in C#. But we didn't. We made a very opinionated call on using JavaScript because we understand that that's the most ubiquitous language on the planet, right? And for that matter, TypeScript is also, they're interchangeable with each other, right? So if you're looking at more modern JavaScript developers who have moved to TypeScript, they'll be instantly familiar with Rosetta and our implementation of it. So that's the language you need to know if you want to get into the Rosetta SDK, the Rosetta client, and then the Rosetta server itself. It's all based off of JavaScript.
So if there was
except for the DigiByte node under the hood, that is.
Right. So if there was a community member that said, hey, we want to help get you to the next one, we would say, well, you want to know JavaScript in order to help. That's the programming language to help get it to the next, to the latest version that needs to be dealt with.
Yep. And then you're also and you're also going to probably want to have some experience with Open API itself. If you're not familiar with Open API, then trying to get at what is the delta between the two versions is going to be a kind of a rough sled for you. So you definitely want to have Open API experience. And then, of course, Docker. If you don't have any experience with Docker, that's going to also be a little bit of a learning curve for you, because if you can't get Docker up and running, then the whole thing is kind of kaput.
Yeah, that's what I have no experience with. So
it's very easy to learn Docker, though.
Okay.
Just so you know, it's a quick YouTube away, and you're off to the races.
I just have a bunch of folders on an AWS site, but nothing. I think I need to learn Docker.
I think Docker itself has pretty good tutorials on their website too. They have a nice hello world. They'll get you up and running with a container pretty quick.
Yeah, it's very obvious as when Laura and I were like planning this out, and Larry, it was like that was kind of my questions that I was posing to Laura so much about the Docker types of questions, because it was definitely something that I need to learn more about, even though because it's very standard now. I guess I'm behind there, but yes.
But we definitely hope to get it. We hope to get it brought up to the current version. It's something I'd like to have done soon.
And can we capture? Do you mind sharing your screen again and pulling up the actual Rosetta website? We're just going to kind of give also, if this is a good time to do that, just to show when GTO talks about like all the documentation that's available for free, which is a really big deal, to show the website and just all of the resources that are kind of open and available. You could spend a week on this website. There's so much information in here, but it's really a very interesting place to kind of go and check out. And we can, provide the link to that too in the chat. So, but I thought that would be something interesting to show. And if you go on the left, GTO said they added a best practices there as well. It's just, it's very interesting. Like it's just got a lot of information in that. So, something for people to check out. You really can't put too fine a point on what Laura's saying here. Every time somebody asks me about Rosetta, I kind of feel bad that I respond the way that I do, because it kind of probably comes across kind of crass. But really, read the documentation. Is like you cannot possibly do yourself a better favor than to spend more of your time inside of the Rosetta documentation than you spend inside of the DigiByte GitHub repos for Rosetta. And the reason for that is because, at least for the mission of Rosetta, we don't want people to really have to worry about DigiByte so much. We kind of want DigiByte to fade off into the background and just be the fast, low cost, efficient blockchain that it is. We all love DigiByte. That's why we're here. And so DigiByte's the engine that's driving the Rosetta thing. We just want you to learn Rosetta at this point, right? Because Rosetta's the thing that that's like the next layer of abstraction above this great thing that we've built called DigiByte. Now that we all have this well-oiled machine, and it's the longest running blockchain in the world, we don't need anybody to really focus their energies and attention there. I mean, that's working. What we need folks to focus their energy and attention on now is what cool things can I build? What interesting things can I build using this very easy to understand API, right? And so spend your time in this documentation. Of course,
we always need protocol developers. We're always hiring protocol developers, right? So, please, if you want to be a protocol developer, reach out, right? But Rosetta is not about that. Rosetta is about building applications and real world use cases on top of what makes DigiByte great. So this documentation is really just fantastic.
And we know that not all API documentation is created equal. So when you actually have good documentation, you use it.
That's right.
I think I wanted to jump in here, and this is a good time for me to jump in and make a comment. Hi, everyone. Jose. You probably see me on Twitter. I'm always tweeting about DigiByte. And I guess my best, I guess the way I look at it and the way it makes sense to me, because I'm not a programmer, I'm not a developer, but I look at how applications are built on, on the internet. And, it's a network protocol with different things that are being plugged into it. And that's how, I guess, it makes sense to me. And if I'm, if there's a better way to look at it, please help me understand that. But that's the way I understand it. But I want to say that that Medium article that was put out by the Alliance, that was like, to me, like I went over it, I read it, and then I listened to it once I figured out I could listen to it. I listened to it about 10 times. And it was like, I don't understand what's under the hood, but I can tell you, like, the surface of it, and what, and the other thing that hasn't been talked about was like the stacks, stacks, I think API, which is all exciting. And to me as a spectator, not, someone that, does any of this. But anyways, I wanted to kind of just use that as a reference, and the way that it makes sense to me in my head, that it's kind of a platform where, it doesn't have to, I guess, like you were talking about, GTO, about being a core developer, but building like applications that you can plug into the blockchain.
I'm going to actually piggyback off of what Jose is saying here, and not to just dumb it down to the point where it's almost insulting, but it's a good analogy, right? So when you get in your car has a very specific interface. And it's super intuitive, right? I can throw my 12-year-old into my car and she instantly knows exactly how she's supposed to work that thing. She doesn't know how the motor fits into the car. She doesn't know how the transmission works. She doesn't know how the combustion cycle works. She doesn't know anything about that aspect of the system, but she intuitively knows how to drive the car. Well, that's Rosetta, right? You, as a web developer, and maybe you aren't a web developer, Jose, but anyone that is a web developer, they intuitively know, looking at this documentation, how to drive this car. They don't need to know anything about the blockchain under the hood to make that thing go. They know how to make a request and a response, and that's all they need to know. And that is perfectly fine. We wouldn't have the amazing technology that we have in our lives if we all had to understand how the combustion cycle of a car works, or by extension, how the assembly code is generated for the silicon that's in our machines from the higher level languages that we write our programs in. We would not live in this modern world that we live in, and that's where blockchain kind of is right now. It's at that 1960s, 1970s kind of assembly punch card kind of world, and so there's not a whole lot of adoption of blockchain yet because there aren't these very clean, intuitive interfaces with which to interact with the system in an easy way. But that's what Rosetta's for. That's why it's here. It's maybe you're a fan of Coinbase, maybe you're not. It really doesn't even matter. We can poke holes at an exchange all day. I know we probably all have very strong opinions about that, but those developers within Coinbase that came up with this spec, they did this community a really huge service, and it's kind of unfortunate, and I think it'll resolve itself over time. it's kind of unfortunate that it had to get released by Coinbase, right? Because it's like this powerful thing that they gave back to the community really doesn't get enough attention that it should. But I think that'll change over time, especially as we, hopefully get a lot more people to start building applications and start talking, I built this cool thing because of Rosetta. Anyway.
Yeah, that's good. And we were going to talk a little bit. I know we're getting kind of close on time or a little over time, but we also want to talk just a little bit at the end about, like why would someone need a blockchain for their application? And who would be the kind of what would be the kind of situation where you're like, okay, I'm going to build an app, but I need the blockchain as the foundational layer, like you were talking about earlier, to participate with. And when would that not really be appropriate? Because everybody's like blockchain everything, but does everything need a blockchain? And talk maybe a little bit. We can talk a little bit about that.
Boy, I don't think we have enough time to get into that.
Well,
that's a deep conversation.
Just like in general.
Everything that's in our life right now, even this thing that we're talking to each other on, is all made possible by some pretty low level protocols, right? TCP/IP, HTTP, and several others, UDP, and on, right? There's just this cornucopia of very esoteric, very hard to understand protocols that allow all of this amazing stuff to happen, but the developers of Discord don't really know about any of that, or they know they're there, but they don't deal with them, they don't touch them, right? But they build all of this fantastic technology on top of this global decentralized network that is called the internet. The problem with the internet is that it's largely centralized, right? Unfortunately, there's many gatekeepers that can control what packets can go where and when. Blockchain is kind of a new idea, but it sits on top of a lot of the same foundational protocols. It still uses TCP/IP. It still uses, RCP and lots of that lower underbelly kind of stuff that makes the internet work, but in a way that's even more decentralized than the internet is today. And so when you think about applications that you can build on blockchain, really it's the same things that you can build on Internet 1.0. or Internet 2.0, or everybody's talking about this stupid Web3, whatever. It's all the network to me, whatever iteration it happens to be in. But the point is that whatever you can build on that network, you can build on a blockchain. The problem, and it's a good problem, in my opinion, is that the blockchain is new, right? The internet was born started coming into view in the late 50s, early 60s, and then it evolved to become what it is over decades. Blockchain's only been around for, 13 years, maybe less, really. Bitcoin was the first, and, it's certainly been in production the longest, but it's still pretty new. It's still an infant. And so it's got performance issues. It's got things we're still trying to figure out. It's kind of super expensive to use it, right? Because everything you do on the blockchain, fortunately or unfortunately, requires a transaction fee, to pay for the miners to validate the blocks and all this and that. That's in the centralized model. That's what you all pay your monthly internet subscription fee for, right? Paying AT&T or Verizon, or there might be some non-US folks here, whatever your cable provider is. You're paying those folks. With this network, you have to pay the network, right? Not the network provider in the current model. So there's bottlenecks, there's performance issues, there's cost issues, there are things that make building applications on blockchain just more difficult right now. But that's not always going to be the case, because as this network matures, the way Internet 1.0 matured, we're gonna figure these things out, and we're gonna solve these problems. We being the protocol developers, right? The core developers of Bitcoin, the core developers of DigiByte, the core developers of Litecoin, and all the other UTXOs out there. We're gonna solve this stuff, but it's gonna take lifetimes to do it. I'll be passing the baton to my daughters, right? I tell a lot of my friends in the blockchain space, one of them, which is on this call, I say this to them all the time: long time preference people, but now is the time to get in. So what kind of applications can you build? You could build everything that you can see on the internet. You could build a Discord on the blockchain. It's just going to be slow. It's going to be not the best user experience, but that's not a bad thing. We need you guys to build those things, because the failing at building those things is how we learn how to solve those pain points. And until we get through that first couple of generations, it's going to be kind of rough going, and the centralized model is going to kind of have everybody's attention, and but that'll change. So get out there, build whatever you want. It doesn't have to be logistics. It doesn't have to be fintech. It doesn't have to be anything anybody tells you it has to be. You can build whatever you want on the blockchain.
That's a good answer, and it goes back to the point of why would somebody choose to do that with DigiByte? If we talk about like fees and that sort of thing, I mean, definitely makes it more advantageous as a cost-effective level too. I know we're getting pretty close on wrapping up here. Does anybody have any questions for any of us or for GTO or? GTO, you've done just absolutely fantastic, and thank you so much for your time. We know you're incredibly busy, so thank you so much.
Happy to do it. No worries.
Anybody have any last minute questions? And you can always, I really hope having these monthly sessions and Discord is going to start kind of bringing people more into this server and utilizing it. So if you have questions that you maybe think about later or something, that's what the Discord is for, and we can start discussions in here. It's just so much easier than Telegram or Twitter, because we could even make a specific channel just about Rosetta. And I know we've got Gitter and we've got GitHub, but for like the non-technical people, it might be a good place to have the discussion, or bring in new people if you do need a developer that you're like, what, we might could use your help here, or you might want to check this out, a place to bring them, to give them the resources and to let them know there's a community here that's, really interested in supporting anybody trying to build or help us.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, this was, again, thanks so much, Patrick and GTO, like both of you with your different layers of experience. I learn something new every day. So this is just, I've learned new stuff even in this talk today. So really appreciate you guys taking the time. And for next month, our topic, we discussed, we're going to focus on wallets as our topic. So Patrick's been doing some tutorial lessons on wallets and has definitely gleaned a lot from that. But
lots of lessons learned, yes, and continuing to be lessons learned.
So anybody who is interested in that topic, wants to help you in research, or has research that they want to provide, reach out to us. Always happy to work with the community on these. But yeah, and hopefully these monthly meetings, and we can do more of these even impromptu in the community to start utilizing the server more, because I think it's just a nice way to connect and get out of the noise of Twitter files and blah blah blah. And we don't have the the scammers of Telegram. So it's just a nice space. And thank you, Archie, for hosting us in here today. And I guess we'll see everybody online if there's no other questions for us.
All right, thanks for having me, guys. It was fun to chat.
Thank you so much.
I don't really have a whole lot of time to interact in the community with y'all, but I'm very much there, and I'm happy to come back in the future if y'all think it's valuable.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, again, thanks everyone. Laura, thanks for setting this up, and GTO, amazing, man. Really eye-opening in terms of like what an API is and how it could be used. I just want to say thank you. All right, so I think that wraps it up, right, Laura? I believe I have recorded this fully on OBS.